Well, let's kind of dive into how this funding structure has changed over past years. This is actually, quite interesting. Like, for example, it's pretty obvious that Bill Gates has a lot of influence at the WHO. I think his foundations are the number two funder, right, of the organization. But that's not all. Of course, you're talking about pharmaceutical companies funding all sorts of directed projects. So there's kind of two things I want to discuss. One is how that landscape has really changed over past years and how we arrived at this situation that you just described, over the last 2 years. That's one piece. And then the second piece is, basically what are the implications of these types of structures where, very, very directed funding is going for very directed work that I suppose might be in the direct interest of the funder, right?
If you go back 25 years, there was the World Health Organization and then some organizations like UNICEF, etc., that were involved in global health, public health. It was called tropical health or international health then, and not many others. So there were schools that concentrated on this, but they were low funded. Disease programs in countries had very low funding. Around the year 2000, a lot of money started to become available, initially from countries and a global fund for AIDS, TB and malaria was instituted to fight those three diseases. And the idea was that it would be a conduit for money to the countries. It's now grown into quite a big bureaucracy, but it's become the main funder internationally of HIV, TB and malaria, with the exception of HIV, where PEPFAR, the US government, has a very big separate fund. And it puts out about $3 or $4 billion a year for these diseases. And that's mostly country money, but it's also private money. It had a big impact, and it was good at the time in that it still does a lot of useful things, because giving a lot of money for these diseases will help buy basic drugs for malaria, etc., diagnostics, drugs for HIV, etc., is keeping a lot of people alive who would otherwise have died. So this influx of money was in many ways a very good thing for a lot of people. But it brought with it the idea of particularly of public-private partnerships, where the private sector would partner with the public sector because the public sector didn't have much money and the private sector did. And so it seems, again, a good thing. You're bringing more money to the problem, you're bringing private sector expertise, etc., on running programs. The problem is that along with that, clearly the private sector has to have other agendas because they have shareholders that they have to please. So inevitably you start shifting in a certain direction, and that is not going to be towards the classic sort of WHO horizontal idea of health where communities are empowered to manage their own health and decide their own priorities. It's going to be towards stuff that you can make money from, so particularly vertical approaches and commodity based. So then other organizations started cropping up. So Gavi, which concentrates on vaccination and getting vaccines out, and mostly vaccines for vaccine preventable diseases for children. So again, in essence, a good thing. Unitaid was set up, which all these, and Gavi and Unitaid have both private and country money again. And the WHO, just going back, the WHO, officially the World Health Assembly it's just countries. So that in theory is the governance of WHO. Gavi and Unitaid and CEPI, which is a newer one, which is just concentrated on pandemics and started a few years ago. They also have private influence on the board. And these organizations also have far laxer rules in terms of accepting private money and corporate money. So they're quite significantly financed from the private sector. And they also give money to WHO, so they could be a conduit for private sector money to WHO. So we have this increasing, with this more money, which can be a good thing, we have this increasing, particularly Western corporate influence on global health by companies and by individuals who have investments in companies who will make a lot more profit if they sell more commodities to these countries. So you immediately have this conflict of interest arising. And that doesn't appear to have been managed very well. And certainly I think in COVID-19 we're seeing apparently where that has led. And so the response now is not that surprising given what has happened and the way that health has changed and the significant increase of private sector and corporate influence over the direction of global policy.
We live in an era of censorship and disinformation, and it can be really hard to know what's true and what's false in this information climate. To get honest information and insights you can trust, join us on Epoch TV. You can sign up for your 14-day free trial at ept.ms/free trial Jan. That's ept.ms/free trial JAN. So, the question that's just coming to my mind, again, I have to think about this lockdown policy that is so different from everything that was, acceptable in 2019, as you outlined earlier, right? It wasn't just, the U.S. that did this. It wasn't just China that did this. It was, frankly, most countries. There's a few very, very stark outliers, right, and states in the U.S. and so forth, but almost everybody did this. So this is this, is I guess, the power to institute, to influence this kind of policy, is that already, sitting at the WHO or somewhere else, or where is that?
So the power to recommend it is there. How that is, whether countries bow to that power varies. So we saw countries this time, such as Sweden, Tanzania, a few others, that did not lock down, did not institute masking policies, etc. And they appear to have had the same COVID mortality as other countries. And it appears that they're having less collateral damage, which isn't surprising. We don't expect these policies to really help with an aerosolized respiratory virus overall. They may slow it down slightly, but if you're locking down countries like India or parts of Africa or other fairly dense population centers, you're not stopping people from interacting with each other. People live in very high density situations. They need to go out every day to get food. They don't have refrigerators. They need to go to communal toilets, whatever. I mean, they're going to keep interacting. They have to go to markets. But all you're doing is stopping them from getting any income. So instead of being at risk of the virus on an income, they're at risk of the virus with no income. So we don't expect that really to help. In Western countries, again, the policies are very strange. Things like curfews. As if the virus only spreads after 10 p.m. So if you stop people from going out at 10 p.m., you'll stop spread. It's just that, really, these are ludicrous things to do from a public health point of view. We knew very early on that it was concentrated particularly on old people and people who were already sick with metabolic disease. So we could have concentrated on them, and a lot of people advocated for that. But the idea of locking down children and working age adults who are fit and well and at intrinsically very low risk from this virus, and thereby putting them at all these other public health risks, is not a rational response.